Hi folks, I'm smoking my Peterson estate pipe and in it I have some Dunbar mix. Many of you know that I met with Simon when he came to Newcastle and we sat talking and he suggested it might be nice for me to share with you some of the things I said about the work that I used to do. I was a diocesan deliverance minister and exorcist. Sounds exciting, but it was quite boring in many ways. I started off being interested in that very early on in my Christian life and was involved even before I'd done any training and appointed by the diocese. We had a parish with 3 other churches and 2 priests and a deaconess. And they just couldn't handle anything to do with the occult or to do with hauntings or problems that people had. It just freaked them out. So I used to get involved quite heavily because they'd refer to me. And we had 3 big estates that we lived on. It was a very, very busy parish. We'd have sort of 14 funerals a week and maybe 17 marriages and then all the baptisms, which all involved visits and visits after the services and that kind of thing. So it was a busy parish. But on the estates, we had people who frightened themselves by fortune telling or using a Ouija board or something to do with the occult. And what usually happens is that something happened and scared them. And they'd get in touch with us. And we knew it was coming because it would start on one estate and work its way round the other 2 estates. Most of the problems they had were the product of an unclean mind rather than an unclean spirit. And I'm not being unkind when I say that. It's just that they got frightened and it affected their well-being. But there was actually nothing to be frightened of. So what I often used to do is talk with them, and then I would do what I call the magic bits. That's celebrating communion in the house, cleansing the house for them, and advising them not to have anything more to do with those kind of things. But occasionally there'd be things that you just couldn't explain. People often mistake poltergeist experience for spirits, and it's not, or at least not in my experience. It's usually the product of somebody in the house, either somebody who's emotionally disturbed or somebody who's disabled. And it's not that they make it up or do it themselves. It's just that the upset and emotional power of their mind does things. So that often entailed sort of doing a bit more counselling and being with the person and encouraging them and helping them in that way. I had one experience in the parish. Well, I had 2 that were, I'm very sure, were the product of something other than that. One was a phone call I got from a lady who was disabled, and she lived in a totally new build. They hadn't been built very long. And she'd woken up one night to see a man stood at the bottom of her bed, and he was dressed as a farm worker. He had an old hat on and the old jackets that they used to wear. And he turned round and walked through her bedroom door and started to disappear through the floor as he walked into her bathroom. The thing that puzzled me, as I say, was that it was a new build. And you sort of think, well, how could somebody like that be involved? She also suffered a disability, so there was also that question mark in my mind. But when I did the research into that area, there used to be an old farmhouse built halfway on the plot that her house had been built. And from as far as I could measure, the stairs were about where her bedroom door was, down through the bathroom. So I'd taken a full history from her before, which we have to do, and I'll go into that a bit later. And I went and did a cleansing of the house, which involves using holy oil or holy water and cleansing each room and sealing it, leaving the front door open and making your way to the front door. And before that, I celebrated Holy Communion with her to bring that healing power into the house. And when I checked up, she had no further experiences of it. The thing had completely gone. A lot of those events are nothing to worry about. Sometimes it's what I call an after image. You know, where there's a big battlefield, you sometimes get a bad feeling about it. You sometimes see maybe images of the people who were involved in the battle. And it's almost as if it's like a photographic image that's stamped on that area rather than the spirit of the people involved. You know, that the power was so great that it left an after image. And to give you an idea what I mean, during the Hiroshima bomb, there was a man stood near a gas meat, you know, a big gas holder. And that didn't get completely destroyed, but his image was welded onto it. So you have the image of this man stood there in the pose that he was when the bomb went off. And, you know, it's that kind of thing, I think, is left. Sometimes it's people who have unfinished work, or there's something that is holding them to earth. I've very, very rarely come across anything demonic. And I'm always suspicious of churches where they're constantly casting out demons and devils and the like, because that's just not my experience. I remember seeing a man called Metropolitan Anthony of who was a Russian Orthodox archbishop. And he was on television with various people involved in this kind of ministry. And the various churches that were involved, as they were telling their stories, he looked very puzzled. There was one man saying, well, we asked the demon's name, and once we know that, we begin to cast it out in Jesus' name. And they went into all this rigmarole and about how often, they worked in this ministry. And Metropolitan Anthony looked very puzzled. And the presenter of the programme says, Metropolitan Anthony, you seem puzzled. And he said, yes, I am rather. Because as a priest, I have authority over those kind of things. And he said, what I normally do is just say, go to the place appointed for you. And they go. It was a very matter-of-fact thing for him. And I think that's true of most of these things. The other one that I had that I thought was real in that parish was somebody had been taken with a person who was involved in healing, unofficially. And she'd gone with him. And as he was supposedly casting out this thing from the person they were visiting, she said she felt as if something had gone into her. And she was doing automatic writing and that kind of thing. She asked me to help. So I did a full medical history. As far as possible, we tried to get in touch with doctors and psychiatrists and that kind of thing. We make sure that there's no illness involved, because many illnesses seem to mimic the effects of oppression. And then we decided to have a healing service, a cleansing service, where I took a full history of her family. And I asked two friends who were involved in the ministry several miles away if they would come and sit in the congregation and support me. And it was interesting because there was a point where the back door opened of the church and two people sat beside them. And they looked round and there was the woman. But the one that had affected them most was the man. And they said, one of them came forward to talk to me and said, we think you've got something real here, but we think it's the man. And he wouldn't have anything to do with that at all. So we had to just pray for him by ourselves. But the woman came forward and I celebrated communion. I anointed her with holy oil and I commended all her past relatives and living relatives to God's power and cleansing. And at the end of that, we just left it. And she had no desire to do automatic writing again or anything like that. It had totally gone. But we really did worry about that man. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because it's 15 minutes. And what I will do in the next one is start with my official training and then talk about some of the things. But I want also to talk about some of the things that you may have heard of or may have come across and give you a different point of view. For instance, witchcraft and witches, and what do they do, and what's that all about? and it's certainly nothing to do with the devil. But anyway, that will come later. So may God bless you. May he pour down his love upon you. May he guard you and keep you. And may he never, ever let go of your hand.